Used to be a hustler. I used to be a runner. Came from the gutter. Now we be on that struggle. Used to be in a life full of crime. I gotta hustle and do whatever it takes to survive up in the jungle. Talking rock bottom from the gutter. I used to get in trouble, but now I'm beyond the struggle.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. This is Mark with Beyond the Struggle. I am here this morning. I am freezing my butt off, as you can see, with my sweater on, and it's cold in my studio this morning again in Colorado. I am here this morning with Victoria. Victoria, how are you doing this morning?
I'm great, Mark. Good to be here. Glad to be here.
Yes. So what we're gonna do this morning, we are gonna do a testimonial video, and you're gonna tell us your story and how things came about in your life and where you're at today. And at the end, we'll ask some questions and see what's going on.
Awesome. All right. Well, so I'm going to start with the beginning on why I believe I became an addict. So my mother had mental illness, and my father saw that he couldn't fix that, so he had to separate from her. So I spent my first 4 years with my mom and dad, but then my dad took me out of that situation, and he left with me. And at that time, he had help from other relatives. So I stayed at my grandmother's for a little bit. And then just when I had gotten settled in at my grandmother's, till about the age of 5, then he took me to Iowa. And at that time, I got settled in with my grandfather, his new wife, and their kids. So, and I felt, finally felt comfortable there. And then my dad would move me over to my aunt and uncle's and my cousin's house. And I finally got comfortable there. And then and I would always, spend time with my dad in between spending time with these other families. But to be honest, I never felt part of, and I never felt like I really had my place. Like I felt just kind of like out there in limbo. And every time I got comfortable, I'd be swooped up and on to the next situation. Well, um, at that time, I didn't realize that I was probably getting some detachment issues or attachment issues. Every time I would get comfortable, then it would just change. So I eventually, my dad had remarried my stepmom, and they have 2 daughters. So I have 2 half sisters. And I think I pretty much, as a teenager, checked out at that point. I didn't feel part of, and I never felt like I belonged or that was really my family. So they had their little family unit, and I just never felt like I was part of that unit. So I kind of just checked out, did my own thing, went to school, got out of school, graduated with honors. So, I had put my effort into my education. But I decided to leave to go to Colorado. I had another sister, an older sister. We had the same mother, and her dad raised her, and my father had raised me. But she had landed in Colorado, and she wanted me to come visit her. So I came out to Colorado, and that was, 2 weeks after I graduated from high school. And we were getting to know each other, we a little bit of sister rivalry in some regards and normal sister stuff. And at one point she didn't actively do drugs at that point, but she had always said, if you ever do a drug, do meth. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, she introduced me to meth, and off and running. I was off to the races, right? Off to the races, so to speak. She could take it or leave it, but I never put it back down for 20 years. So, um, you know, over the years, in and out of jails, in and out of institutions, but I felt like I had found my people. I felt like I belonged, and the depression in my brain had left. Like I had always suffered from this like sorrow, this internal sorrow that I had within my heart in a void. There was always something missing in my heart. And so, drugs filled that. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to feel. I didn't have to um I didn't have to deal with icky emotions because I was just off and running. And so later in life I would learn that that typically is indicative of borderline personality disorder. And so to characterize that in a nutshell, it's a real or imagined fear of rejection or abandonment. And sometimes I imagine it. Sometimes I will have a friend in my life or a boyfriend, and I will think that they're abandoning me or rejecting me in any way. And sometimes it's made up in my head, I'll be honest. And so then I run the other way. I just walk away from it. I was really good at walking away from people, places, and things, and never really developing healthy relationships. And so the other part of borderline personality disorder is the suicidal ideologies. So many times I had suicide attempts or thoughts of killing myself and maybe acting out on that. And lots of mental health institution stays, in and out of mental health psych wards over the years. And You know, the addiction took me on a roller coaster. I would have a job and I would go to school or college, and then things would fall apart. I would just end up deeper into my addiction. And I experienced the homelessness. Um, Sometimes, I was living out of my car, and sometimes my car would get impounded and I'd be living on the streets or couch surfing, and then I would try different things. For me, the things that I had tried, I mean, this list it gets extensive, but I'd went to the Salvation Army rehab. I'd went to paid rehabs, day programs, 12 steps, working with a sponsor. I did the CMA, CA, NA, AA. I would go to group classes. I would go to individual therapy. Psychiatrists would prescribe me medications. I would go to, I had a psychotherapist at one point. I did cognitive behavioral therapy. I did dialectical behavioral therapy. Uh, monitored sobriety, UAs, you name it. I was the perfect candidate for probation. I love probation. I could pass that with flying colors. I was really good at jumping through their hoops, and I was high the whole time. And um, it just, nothing worked. Nothing worked. And so finally, my final arrest was in 2014 on Valentine's Day. And let's see, I would have been 40 years old um, at that point. And incident to being picked up at a psych ward, I was actually trying to get into rehab one more time. I was on probation. I had 2 new pending court cases for drugs, and I was trying to get into a facility, which you can't just do at the drop of a dime. They don't have bed space. It takes time. It takes a lot of effort. You have to get on there. You have to call every day. So I was doing too little, too late. And so, and I didn't know what to do with that because I wasn't getting anywhere, and it was down to the wire. So I missed my court date, and the facility knew the psych ward that I was in knew that. And I was kind of acting out. I was mad because I felt like nobody was listening to me. So anyway, incident to that, they ended up having officers come and pick me up from the psych ward. And since I got arrested at the psych ward, that is a one-way trip to the rubber room in the turtle suit at jail. And
Mm.
that I think that was my last rock bottom. It was humiliating. It was degrading. You're in a Velcro, uh, padded Velcro shell, if you will. The turtle suit has just got Velcro up here and here. It's your blanket, it's your bed, it's your pillow. You're in a huge, giant, cold, um, rubber room with rubber mats on the floor and on the walls. You have a hole in the middle, which is your toilet. You have to stand over it to pee or or poop, and they flush it when they want to. You don't even they don't even hand you like in normal jail, you would get a paper bag. They don't even hand you that. They basically or a paper bag with like plastic, your sandwich in, maybe wrapped in plastic. You didn't even get that. You got 2 pieces of bread and a piece of bologna thrown into a paper sack. You didn't get a cup. You could come out and use the drinking fountain one time. I didn't have books. I didn't have access to blanket. I didn't have access to paper. I didn't have nothing. You're just in this room by yourself, constant video surveillance, and people around you were wailing. Like there was a guy that was wailing, except for when he was eating. That was the only time in a 24-hour period that he would be silenced. And so you're losing your mind in there. I mean, I literally never, ever imagined being in that situation, or I couldn't even fathom that that's where my life had taken me at that point. So I begged classifications to let me go to general population. And as soon as I got to general population and got settled into my cell, I hit my knees and I begged and pleaded for God to show me something different. Show me what you got. I was like, show me what you got, because up to that point, even though I had been baptized as a teenager, I scoffed at believers, at Christianity. I would argue. Was self-proclaimed agnostic. I would argue about the validity of the Bible, any chance I got, and I just wasn't a believer. But up to that point, everything that I had tried had failed me. And so I think there was a part of that I had seen happiness in other people. There's people out there in this world that I have come across that have lost children, that have lost their spouse, that have had, their ultimate betrayal where their husband cheated on them with their best friend or vice versa, and all of these just heartbreaking situations, and disease and cancer. And there are people out there that I have seen that have handled that kind of heartache and pain with, like, they just handled it with such grace. And I never understood that. But there was one thing that I noticed in those: they were all believers, they had faith. And so I zeroed in on that. I mean, that was basically in my brain. I'm like, okay, well, if they can have that, then I want that. That's what I want. And so I did. I begged God, and I was literally on my knees, hands and knees, and I said, show me something, show me anything, show me something different. And I will honestly say that there was a tangible feeling of this darkness leaving me. And I had such an affinity to the darkness and just dark, sadistic things for as long as I can remember. And at that very moment, it felt different. It felt like there was just something lifted from my shoulders, lifted from my brain. I felt these cobwebs actually, dissipate in my brain. And so I'm like, well, I got to do my part too. I know that like, you have to work for things. If, there's an effort that has to come from my part. So every day during afternoon lockdown, I would read an entire book of the Bible, an entire book to my cellie. She'd fall asleep, but she would let me read it. So every day during that afternoon lockdown and shift change, I would just read, and read and read. And so I systematically went through the Bible. And because you have to know who God is, and you have to know, and I'm passionate about learning and knowing things. And so, I had to eat a lot of my words. What I thought I knew and what I used to argue, it was not the case. And I was just so blind to it, living in the dark. But God slowly started to, like, I always had this always bad things lurking around every corner. Like, I always expected the shoe to drop. I always expected the next bad thing. That's how I lived my life. Like, the one thing that was constant was bad luck. And and
Let
it
me get
went away.
your camera a little bit, if you don't mind, Vic. You're kind of hazy, and I didn't want to interrupt your story, but
Oh,
you're kind of like going. You've been hazy for the last 10 minutes. I
I don't
just
know.
want to. Right
No, that's fine.
It's just
Is it better? I
uh,
don't know. Hold on.
wasn't as clear as it was before. Like when we
That's
were.
weird.
Yeah, it's all. I mean, it's not a huge thing. I mean, I can still hear you clearly, so that's why I didn't interrupt you. But
I feel like I have bad reception in my house.
yeah,
I don't actually have I don't have internet in my house, so it's on my cell phone, but it might be where I'm sitting. I don't know.
I could see. Yeah, I can see you a little bit better now. It's all right.
A little bit better. One
Yeah.
hold on. Does that have light?
Uh, yep. That's perfect.
A little bit?
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Maybe?
It'll work. It'll work.
Okay.
I can hear.
Okay. Okay. All right. Um, so while I was sitting in jail and then and incidentally went into prison, um, there was a couple of other things that happened. And, I was alone and I felt like my family had given up on me. I felt like I felt like all my friends wanted to, the minute they knew I was getting locked up, like we knew I was going to end up in prison and they climbed over themselves for my, for my spot, for my connection, for people. And I felt like everybody was backstabbing me. And so I went in very alone, um, and have people to call on my call list or, I think one person that I've known for years wrote me, um, and was there for me. But other than that, like my family, they were done. They were fed up with the calls. You have a call from an inmate at, and so I read the book The Shack, and even though I've heard some controversy over that book, what it gave to me is I felt like I had spent an entire life like kind of abandoned by people, friends, place, all things. And so
Right.
in that book, God is depicted as a carpenter, a mother, and a father. And so I said, okay, God, I'll put you, that father that I so desperately wanted, but he was there, but he was emotionally unavailable. I'm like, okay, God, I'll put you there. You can be my father and carpenter, rebuild you, rebuilding things. Okay, I'll let you rebuild me. And the third was, I really never had. My mother wasn't in my life, so I didn't have a nurturing mother. So I was like, okay, God, you can be that for me. And I made that thought process in my head so that I made God the center of everything. Um, and that was important. So um I see here. So slowly things started to go in my favor. I remember I was supposed to do, I had 3-year sentence and I they basically ran one sentence concurrent, one consecutive. And so the end result was I was supposed to do 3 years in and then 3 years of parole. But somehow or another, it got equated. My parole ended up getting cut down. The number wasn't right on my paperwork when I got there. And of course, I'm not going to say anything. And I was like, I'm just not going to tell my parole officer that's not right. And so uh, at that time, so I was 42 years old. And honestly, I thought at that time too that, if a woman doesn't have it if you don't figure your life out by 40, then you're a lifer. I always thought that. So, um, if, and there were a lot of women in there that had nothing. There were a lot of like 50 and 60-year-old women in prison that really resonated with me because they had nothing. They had nobody there for them. At that point, most of your family has probably passed away at that point. And if you burned all your bridges with the rest of your family, you have nobody. And their kids wouldn't talk to them. And I just thought how lonely that would be, that you get to a point in prison that's like your life. That's okay. You're okay with being there, because you don't have anything else. And I thought to myself, "You God, Victoria, if you don't stop this, that's you. That's you. You're gonna have nobody and nothing, and you're just gonna be a miserable old lady in prison." And I didn't want that. I didn't want that. So in prison, I ended up I finally got paroled and had to go to the halfway house. And incidentally to that, um, I killed my number in the halfway house. They wouldn't let me budge. I kind of tried to weasel my way out a few times. I'm like, I wanted to stay with a friend of mine, and even though deep down inside, if I had done that, I was going to end up right back where I started. So so things actually worked out because I killed my number in the halfway house, and there was a girl there though that had introduced me to. She had been doing these volunteer phone work, um, at Mary's Hope in Denver, and
Mm,
so
yeah.
she got me bumped to the top of the list, the applicant list, which is hundreds of applicants for Mary's, and she got me bumped to the top, and I was able to leave there. Even though I killed my number, I could have went anywhere, but God's. I think God had his hand. I know God had his hand all over that. I went to a sober living facility, and now that was interesting too. Well, in some ways not. So as soon as I get there, I realize my house manager is doing the most, and so are the other two girls. And I'm just trying to struggle to go to work, come back, and stay clean, and just you're fresh, you're lonely, you're trying to rebuild your life, you don't know what direction you're going to go, you're just trying to pay your bills and stay out of trouble at that point. I mean, you really I didn't have a car, I didn't have a driver's license. And so that house self-destructed on its own, and one girl told on the other girl, on the house manager. The house manager got taken back to rehab. The other girl saw that she got in trouble and didn't want to get in trouble, so she left. So, and the other girl that told on the house manager, she up and left. So now I'm in this house all by myself, and I was like, okay, well, it's quiet now at least. I mean, because that was like a late day. A lady came. I mean, it's a not pertinent story, but there was a point in time where a lady knocked on our door, two ladies, and they were like, "Is my husband in there?" And we're gonna call the cops. And I was like, "Whoa, okay, wait a minute. I don't know. There's not supposed to be a man in the house, and there's not." And the neighbors had already said that the cops had been frequent to that particular house, and it looked bad in the neighborhood. So here I am going, what is going on? So anyway, the house manager comes back, and she didn't like me. She's like, "Well, we have to be friends. We have to be friends if you're going to live here." And I thought to myself, I don't have to be friends. I just have to be nice to you, and I have to follow the rules. There is nothing in that says that you have to be friends with your house manager. So she set out on a mission to get me kicked out. Now, the thing that stunk about that is I had a really, really good waitressing job that was walking distance, 6 blocks from the house. And she wanted me relocated to another house all the way across town. And that backfired. Anyway, we went in for a meeting, a mediation meeting, and they instantly removed her, made me house manager.
Good.
And so after that, that gave me some responsibility. But yeah, that didn't turn out the way she wanted it. She was on a rant about how I had to be extricated from the house. And they were like, "Yeah, on the contrary, I don't think so." So anyway, so then I was still in this empowerment program, which was for women. Um, and I was still going to part of that program. And so they offered me an opportunity to have vocational training paid for by this grant, funding from the state of Colorado. And so at that time, I had a lot of education. I would go to college. I wouldn't finish um any of my degrees. I kept going and then not finishing and going and not finishing any of them. So I couldn't get my transcripts at the time, so I had to think outside the box with my training. And I came up with I wanted to get my CDL, commercial driver's license, and not really thinking that that would really result in anything. I think in the back of my mind, I thought, well, it doesn't require my transcripts to be, obtained, and I like to drive, and maybe it'll be useful at some point. And so there was a process there because I didn't have my license. In fact, I had a civil judgment that I had defaulted on for an accident from a DUI charge. So all of these things. And so part of that, that's something important too. So I started setting little goals for myself. Even when I was in prison, I'm backtracking a little bit because it's pertinent to this situation. I made little tiny goals. Like I would tell myself I needed to brush my teeth 3 times a day because I had gotten away from that, because you only brush the teeth you want to keep. Haha. Anyway, so I ended up setting goals like read a book, nail an interview. So I studied, how to nail an interview because nowadays there's so many there's those behavioral interviews and they're, you know, pretty intense questions and you gotta you need to nail your interviews. And so I started just studying all sorts of different things and creating little tiny goals and putting a little bit of money into savings. And anyway, the list goes on and on. And so it would start a pattern for me of behaviors where I would become disciplined because in order to achieve each of those goals, you have to be disciplined in some form or another. Um, so when it came to getting my license back, I had to go meet with a lawyer. I had to set up a payment plan. I had to pay a down payment towards that civil judgment, and which now had tripled the amount that I originally owed due to attorney's fees and interest. So, and then I had to, once I got all of that in place, then it goes to the judge and then it comes back with a piece of paper that says I can go to the DMV, I can get my license. I needed the reinstatement fee of $95 and then I also had to have insurance, and so I had to get non-owner operator insurance, which you can have insurance, which means that you're not driving your own car because you don't own one, but you can drive other vehicles. And then a lot of people, I didn't know that that even existed until I went through this situation. So I paid for my insurance and I paid for my reinstatement of my license and SR22 and did all of that and got my license and went to CDL school. So once you got to CDL school, I had the short and condensed version. Was I ready to be a truck driver? No. And I don't think they thought so either. I thought they figured, well, she's got a rap sheet a mile wide. She had a DUI. Nobody is going to hire her. And so I sat on my CDL over the winter because I didn't want to drive in the mountains in Colorado in the wintertime. I didn't want to start there. So during that time, I found a job board that would match me. It's called Gary's Job Board, and it would weed out all companies that would not even consider hiring me. And I got my CDL and became a semi driver and was able to live on my truck and ended up creating a new life for myself. So I was able to put money aside. I was able to stay away from everybody. So you're out on a semi, you're over the road, you're not around everybody. And my behaviors and patterns and little goals that I would set, became bigger. I would want this much money aside. And during that and then I would pay that off, or I would work on, I systematically set up tiny little achievements for me to achieve and then would, chuck them off one at a time. The reason that was important, I think, to me, again, is, setting patterns and behaviors for my future. And I also started following the Dave Ramsey program to financial freedom, and that was very instrumental. But my family. So I had eventually moved back to Iowa. I was 45. Um, so I had been truck driving for approximately 3 years. So halfway half sober living and then living on my truck. And then I got a job, another trucking job. You have to have 2 years of experience before you can really move on to another solid company. And I found a company out of Minnesota, and that allowed me to move closer to home. Now, remember, my family and I had a strained relationship at best, pretty non existent. And God whispered on my heart, keep showing up with love, even when you don't want to. Like, I don't have to be, I don't have to let my hurt feelings from when I was little um, run my relationships. I don't have to let that basically control me or keep me away from people that I so desperately, wanted to be in my life. Um,
Right.
and although sometimes it was hard, I would show up and sometimes I would get rejected by family members. I still do. There are some family members that still have that label on me, and it doesn't
Yeah.
seem to matter what I do. And I'm okay with that because I've had to accept that. The big component of that is accepting that not everybody is going to welcome you. Not everybody is going to have an open heart or accept you when you've
No,
wronged them.
it took years. It took years to get. It took years to get to that point. You know what I mean? And then it
Yeah,
seems that's something that's not gonna happen overnight. And the people that are going to appreciate you, and not to take away from any single particular family member, but
yeah,
the people that appreciate you and were rooting for you to get your life together are going to be there. That's just the way recovery is with family members. So but we did that.
yes. Absolutely, absolutely. And I saw that time and time again too in the halfway house, these women who didn't have their children because and their families had taken up for with the care of their children and they wanted it and they wanted it right now. They wanted, and their children were hurt. Their family were hurt. There were strains there. And it takes time and you just have to and there is a time you do have to put in the effort and take the time. You have to continually put in the effort because that trust has been destroyed and it didn't go wasn't destroyed overnight. It took a while and took time and you rebuild that. So, um yeah, but God told me just keep showing up with love and now I have a great relationship. I spend a lot of time with my family and I'm not saying it's perfect. Sometimes I can feel in my heart, I'll be like, it's feeling a certain way, but that's past wounds and you just got to work through it. You really have to work through it. Um, Let me see what else. I spend a lot of time, so what I do for me at this point, um, my drug addiction was to the point where I just literally sat stuck. I would sit in the same spot. I wouldn't go anywhere. I wouldn't do anything. I wasn't productive. I'd shut the whole world out and I would just sit and do drugs. You know, um, my friends would clown and I'd be like, I'm on my way, but I was never on my way. Not once. Never. Never was I on my way. And um, it had just absolutely it controlled. I couldn't even function. I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't do anything. At one point, I had one my when I finally one of my court cases. I had just gotten out of jail. I'd gotten arrested on a court case. I was on probation. I got out of jail and I went home and I lived with some people and I got high. And my best friend shows up the next morning to take me to court. And she goes, oh my God, Victoria, you're high. You're so high. She's like, you look like a chicken. I was literally like a chicken with my head cut off. I was out of control. And that wasn't normally how I was. Like I wasn't clucking like that, so to speak. And but she was embarrassed. She didn't want to take me to court. She was like, oh my God, there's no way that you can go to court. Well, I went to court, and sure enough, my public defender, he grabbed me and yanked me down the hallway. And he's like, He goes, "You are hot right now." He's like, "Do you wanna go to prison for the rest of your life?" And I was like, "No." And normally I would deny, 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 like, lie, 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 deny, deny, deny. And, red-handed, red-handed. And so, anyway, I was lucky to make it out of that, but yeah, I got a huge lecture and, it was a problem. So anyway, so these days, where I'm at now, I ended up oh, there's a helicopter outside. I ended up, purchasing a house. I purchased a couple of cars. I have a couple of cars, purchased a house. And I got involved in our local church. Now I went to several churches before I decided on the one. And for me, the one that helps the community, like gives back to the community the most are the
Yeah.
ones that I like. And why? Because I want to be part of that. I like to, you can't keep what you have unless you give it away. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
there's a lot of women, and in my area there's even a lot of disabled and mentally handicapped people that have issues and that need help. A lot of people with disabilities that need help. There's a lot of addicts and alcoholics that need help. There's families that struggle to put food on the table. And, I live in rural Iowa. And so that is where I channel a lot of my generosity now. Um, I feed my brain with positive podcasts. I love a good self-help book or author that has with podcasts because there's always that little tidbit of information that will resonate.
Yeah.
I think it's just important, you know, my story, I don't like to focus on the past because there was so much that happened. And I feel like my heart races whenever I go back and talk about some of those situations, and,
Yeah.
it kinda gives me anxiety, to
Yeah.
be honest,
No, I
so
mean, you've been through a lot, you know what I mean? And that's the thing is there is, there's always there's levels to this. You know what I mean? I mean,
yeah,
it's the best way to put it. There's levels to this, you know what I mean? An addict is an addict, you know what I mean? But there is levels to addict. I don't care what anybody says because there is somebody that right now is out there using and going to work and they're maintaining until they can't.
yeah,
You know what I mean? What do they call them? The functioning alcoholic, where they drink
yep,
and they drink until that one day they're coming home and run into somebody and kill somebody, and all of a sudden they thought they had it
right,
all together. So there is levels to it, and it does, when you start scratching that surface or you start picking the scab that's actually healed. Anytime you do these kind of things, when you do these interviews or testimony interviews or breakout videos, I always get that from everybody. Everybody's always like, man, most of the time people break down crying or they're upset, because it's like, you bring back all the memories of the stuff you went through. But it's like, if you think about where you're at in your life today,
mhm,
I always say, I'm like, man, I wish I had known now what I know back, type of thing. It's like back then I would have used it. I don't think I would have, I am who I am today because of the stuff I went through. You are who you are today because of it. God, you're aligned with God, you're aligned with Jesus, you know what I mean? And you're right where you're supposed to be. You know what I mean? And you know that.
absolutely.
I know that. So I think every little bit that when I'm listening to your story, sitting here, every we my brother told me this the other day, I don't think we recognize the times that God has intervened in our life as much as we should. And hearing him,
Yeah,
even in that sober living home, you're talking about, I get there and it's chaotic. At any given moment, as an addict, you could throw up your hands and dive right into the same, excuse my language,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, but um, you didn't, and God didn't allow that. God said, "You know what? Hold up. Let me clear this house out for you, and let's get you where you need to be because
right.
you needed to be lined up." You know what I mean? So I'm listening to this story, and I'm and I'm pinpointing some of these things in your life that you're like, we over.
God,
I know.
God,
Yeah, absolutely.
at my time. Every step of the way. And, Mark, and you're absolutely right. Um, Here's a little funny. I remember being in the sober living house, and I was a waitress, and that was great and all. But I mean, I didn't see myself, being 20 years from then being a waitress. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know at the time. I wasn't a truck driver and didn't have my CDL, but I remember getting on my knees one day and saying, "Okay, God, you know what? I'd really like a job that would let me travel." And the irony and the funny part about that, this isn't what I thought. Like, okay, you're gonna let's make her a truck driver.
Yeah.
Let's let her travel all over the United States. That wasn't what I had in mind, but it was funny to me because he delivered, he answered wholeheartedly, gave me what I asked for. He did.
Yeah.
And
Well, the rest in 10 minutes, you could have been a stewardess.
yeah, right. I wish. Now, I thought about that too, and they're like, but they're all they're all petite and pretty. But but I did. I was like, all I asked for to give me a job that allows me to travel. Now, haha, it's funny, and I do. Um, and some of the another achievement on that is I never thought that with my record I could have a passport, but I dug into that too, and honestly this year was able to get my tanker and hazmat and tanker endorsement, which again, that was a really, really strict, background check, and it's just these little victories that you see in God all over the place that shape and mold, where you're going, and you may not know it at the time, you may not know your true path or your journey or what's gonna happen. I mean, obviously, we always think we have this idea of how it's going to be, and then life throws us all these curveballs, and you know, the biggest thing I think, especially with friends recently, I've had several friends that have been diagnosed with cancer and that threw their whole life upside down in many ways. And I mean, not all of them had made it through that journey, but those that did, you have two decisions at that point. You either self-destruct and really just throw and decide, screw it, or you do everything you can to live better, eat better, and breathe better, if you will, a better life. And, I see that so common with the believers and the people that don't, they just self destruct. And again, it goes back to God. And when I tell you that, you know, I went to so many doctors, and it wasn't a doctor that diagnosed me with the borderline personality disorder. It was she was a world-renowned therapist, but she moonlighted as she had started in the courts doing this group for women in Arapahoe County courts. And she decided to still do that, even though she had private practice, is world renowned, and does a bunch of other things. She would still do this with her time. And we were going over mental health disorders in this class. And I was reading them and I was like, check, check, check. To the point where it was that aha moment. And it's like, now I have a description of what my problem was, because before I was just weird and dark and angry and at the world kind of, and like I said, had this darkness and an affinity to darkness, an affinity, you know I mean, when I was young, I used to sit when VCR tapes came out. I used to sit and watch horror movies, gruesome horror movies, in the middle of the night by myself, and I'm sure my family was like, yeah, she's different. um but I mean, and I was, and but there was that darkness that just enveloped me. And, actually, if I remember correctly, there was she wasn't even my social worker in the halfway house, but she had just kind of offhandedly said one day, yeah, that's a spiritual condition of the soul. And as soon as she said that, I was, like, borderline personality disorder. I was like, huh, I just put that. I always say I'm just going to put that information in my back pocket for later, because I feel like these little quotes and these little quips in life that you hear, the 12 steps are great. All of those quotes and quips, keep them in your back pocket. They will resonate with you at some point and give you that aha moment. And it can be very pivotal, changing your life. very
Yeah.
pivotal in
Yeah.
changing your life. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep, I agree. It's so weird how we even like you say about those little codes, you don't recognize them until you start to have to actually apply them. You know what I mean? And then you're like,
yeah. Yep.
oh,
Yep. One of my best friends, the one that her sponsor gave her was if it's hysterical, it's historical. So whenever she has a hysterical or emotionally irrational reactive emotion to something in her life, you can pinpoint it back historically that there was a similar situation or yes, just a similar situation in her past that was reminiscent of. And so, being aware of that is huge. And so we're always like, well, if it's hysterical, if you're acting like that, it's historical. So you take it back to the beginning and you work through it.
yeah.
And sometimes that's the best you can do, you know?
Yeah.
So
Well, I want to let you know I'm proud of you, and you've done very well for
thanks, Mark.
yourself. And it is, people that come out of the kind of addictions that we had when we were younger, and I'm talking, 25, 30 years ago. Um, they there's not a lot of stories to tell. You know what I mean?
No.
It sucks to say it that the percentage of recovery is not very high at all. Um, and not only is it not high, but if it is, there's not a lot of success stories to where you can say, oh, I've done something with my life, or I've turned the page and here I am handing it back out. So, I commend you for that, because you are right to recognize those situations in your life where you man, you ran amok, you know what I mean? And, you and I both, in our eyes, not in God's eyes, but in our eyes, we didn't deserve a second chance. You know what I mean? And in God's eyes, in God's eyes, he knew the whole time we were going to get a second chance. You know what I mean? And, when we were ready, we were going to go get it. So I'm very proud of you on that note. I wish you nothing but success, and I would love to get with you. I know me and you were talking before we went on here about that you're studying for manual trucking, and yeah. So yeah. So I would love, if you don't mind, I would love to put you in my book. I have a handful of people on there that I am going to be coming back to in the interviews, and maybe we can catch you at the end of the year, and you can tell us how, let the people know how that went for you and where you're at in your life, and kind of just catch up. People love to hear these stories and then catch up on where you're going. It's a follow up. I know I watch other podcasts, and I follow through watching people, commit to their life, and it's nice to see the progression. I wish that some of these other podcasts did that, for anybody that has other podcasts and they're watching this is kind of shoot. I'm shouting out to you guys. I really think that the people should do that. I think, they're like, oh, they're rooting you on, because anybody that is in recovery and real recovery and really wants that, they're super advocates for people in recovery, if that makes sense. They want to see you succeed. I want to see you succeed. So that's kind of where that. Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Well, what's around those corners. You know what's around those corners. You know what's behind you. You know what I mean? And it's like, like I think one of the ones I really like Jelly Roll. He was talking about he took the mirror off the truck. I'm like, I didn't need to know what's behind me. I know what's behind me. We're going forward, so I don't need to know what's behind me. I, I got what's behind me in my head. You know what I'm saying? I can't. I'm never gonna forget. I'm never gonna forget my past. I'm not going to allow it to beat me up and overtake me anymore. And I encourage that for everybody else too, because even though you have a handful of years, decades behind you in sobriety, it's at any given moment we could throw it all away. Man, the devil never sleeps. You know what I'm saying? And it's ugly because the closer you get to God, I'm sure you know as well. It gets crazy. Oh yeah, yeah. You know. Well, I'm gonna let you get back to your day. I appreciate you, Victoria, for sharing your story with us, and I will put you down to share. Come back and check on you and see where you're at in your life, and share this 13 speed transmission story with us because I'm curious to know what that's going to entail there. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out why we need so many gears, but I'll figure it out. I'm sure I'll. So I'm gonna let you go. If you have anybody that would like to be on the show, just please let them reach out to me. I would love that, and I will be posting yours up here in the next week or two, and then we'll go from there. All right. I appreciate you. All right. You too.